Okay, I think we have a good crowd in. So welcome everybody once again to Chacha 2020. Today we're going to be talking about making every rupee count, ensuring that citizens get the full value of their rights and entitlements. And in the time of COVID, this is probably even more important. A lot more people today are reliant on those entitlements to keep their nose above water. We have a great panel today with deep insights in this space. We're going to quickly segment into that session. But before we do that, I'd also like to remind you that we have another Power Pack session today at 5 p.m. My colleague Gaurav Jain will be sitting down with Barkha Dutt and Faye D'Souza to discuss the intersection of journalism and law and justice and the role that journalism plays in shining a light on injustice in India. Tomorrow we have another session lined up. We will be discussing how we can unlock the potential of legal data. This is especially important considering some of the work that Agami has been involved in trying to bring up a culture of open data in this space. We again have another Power Pack panel tomorrow. So you can join us for that session at I believe the time here is wrong. It's actually at 11:30 a.m. We have another, sorry, we have just a quick message in remembrance of a dear friend and member of the community. Yesterday was Shamnath Bashir's birthday, and we unfortunately lost him in unfortunate circumstances last year. Yesterday's sessions, today's session, and tomorrow's session are all a small tribute from our side to Shamnath. At some point, we'll be talking to Abhay Jain, who'll describe his experience of the idea fellowship. But let's just pause to give remembrance to Shamnath. We'd also like to announce the Agami Prize, which opens up for nominations on June 15th. And as a tribute to Shamnath, we've named one of the prize segments, the Citizenship Prize, the former Citizenship Prize, has now been renamed the Shamnath Bashir Prize. The other segments are the Industry Prize and the Idea Prize, and for more information, you can log on to agami.in. Very quickly, I'm going to introduce our moderators for today. If I could ask our panelists to turn on their video. Professor Ankur from IMA is a member of faculty at IMA. He also has a PhD from the University of Chicago and most ably moderating today's panel. Professor Ankur, over to you. I'll let you introduce our panelists for today and take the session forward. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Varun. And it's a privilege to be sort of moderating this panel, especially one which is in remembering Professor Bashir, who I had never met personally, but I read a lot of his work, a true public intellectual and a really unfortunate loss for all of us. One of our panelists, Abhay Jain, who's an advocate and who works with the Zenith Legal Services at Shivpuri, he probably was closest in terms of his involvement with Professor Bashir. He was an IDIA fellow, which a fellowship which Professor Bashir, I believe, had founded. So we thought we would begin with Abhay sharing a little bit more about the fellowship and how it impacted him. The idea for the panel that we have is that we would go around the room where each of our panelists would sort of share a little bit about their work, the organization that they are representing. The panelists, as you might already know from the posters, etc., are Raghav, who works with Ajivika, which is an organization that has done tremendous work with migrant workers. We have Jayashree, who's a human rights and an advocate who's practiced before both the Supreme Court and the High Court, founder of Nazdeek. We also have Aniket, who is the founder of Hakdarshak, an organization that works to get people information and access to government rights. So it's a very, it's a group of young energetic folk who are probably fighting the toughest battles that can be fought at this point. They are in some ways holding the government accountable, and the government, which should in some sense be looking after many of the issues that all of us care about. So with that, if I could request Abhay to talk about his experience with the IDIA Fellowship and his organization. Abhay.
Hello, I'm Abhay, and I hope I'm audible to all now. So I started working with Professor Bashir closely. I started working closely with Professor Bashir in 2017. Before that, I was in my college, and I used to work with IDIA as a volunteer and co-team leader of the Orissa chapter. My interactions with Professor Bashir were minimal when I was in college, but we used to look up to him. Most of the law students used to look up to him because of the innovations he brought in the field, because of the reasons that he appreciated all the new ideas that we proposed to him. In 2017, I had some personal problems, and because of which, he, finally said that he would support me through this fellowship and allow me to do whatever I want to do in Shivpuri, the work that we are doing in Madhya Pradesh. And that's where I started exploring things with him, and that is where I got to know the person properly. He used to actually invest in ideas. He used to actually invest in people with ideas, I should say, without questioning whether they'll work out or not. The experimentation in the social sector, because like me, there were other folks as well who had some brilliant ideas about some things that could be done to ensure that people have their entitlements. But again, there was no one to listen to those ideas and work with them on that. And Professor Bashir provided with that kind of space. Second is that Professor Bashir not only looked at the academic side of any issue, so whether it can be brought into action. And finally, that he actually gave vision to us. He gave purpose and some sense of meaning in the works that we did. And I think this is not just my story; it's a story of entire IDIA family, particularly all the IDIA scholars who happen to be students from remotest regions of the countries and are now either studying in the best law schools of the country or are working in the best organizations across the world. So I think he just didn't touch our professional life. They actually, made us the beings we are. With that, I think we can just, live up to his vision and emulate some of his virtues for a better world.
Thanks, Abhay. That is quite sort of it's a personal insight, or the sort of what you just shared with us is fairly inspiring. I mean, especially to a person like me who sits perhaps in similar kind of position, and I think that is definitely. Thank you for sharing that. Would you share a little bit more about the organization, what work you've been doing? Yeah.
Yes. So Zenith Legal Services Clinic is based in Shivpuri district of Madhya Pradesh. What we are trying to do here is we are trying to experiment with law and justice to understand what are the best ways in which we can solve the issues that we have currently. So, and with a particular focus on engagement of young people. So what Zenith does is we run a legal clinic here, wherein we are not just trying to solve cases or file cases or give legal advice and legal counseling, but at the same time, what we are trying to do is create a and create social and legal empowerment in citizens. So, and this is what Professor Bashir used to, say every time when we went with an idea, that if you, this is an empowering thought, that if you, if you feed a man, you feed him for a day. But if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. So that's the idea behind empowerment, and that's what we are trying to do in Shivpuri, is to parallelly do two things. First, of course, address the urgent needs that come from time to time in relation to law, but at the same time, the larger perspective is to work towards empowering the people, particularly the young people, so that problems can be solved at the local level, making this local global rather than making global local. I think that's what the government is.
We'll get back to you, and as we go sort of around the room. Jayashree, maybe that be sort of a place where you can also. I think it's related to the kind of work that maybe you've also been trying to do. If you could share your work and introduce yourself and sort of a little bit about your own background, I think it'll be useful for people to know where, in some sense, all of you are coming from and why you're doing what you're doing, as Abhay even shared a little bit. Yeah. Go ahead, Jayashree.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on this panel, and thank you for moderating. Ankur, to just go very far back, is I come from a small town in Maharashtra called Chandrapur. It's close to Gadchiroli and Nagpur, if you all might know. I have done my law from Nagpur University, and I've been practicing in law in Delhi for about 12 years now. I started my law practice as a legal aid lawyer for juveniles who were in conflict with law. I worked there for 2 years, built a legal aid system there, then started assisting victims of rape during the trials before Tisari Court, Patiala House Court, and gradually moved to litigating writ petitions before the High Court and Supreme Court. These petitions were ranged from health rights to housing, right to food, labor rights, and several of them also concerned refugees. I did counseling of refugees for about 5-6 years in Delhi. In 2012, I co-founded Nazdeek with 2 other colleagues of mine. The idea being how to change the entire litigation approach from top down to bottom up, because whenever we try to litigate from a top down approach, the outcome is not implementable, because the decision which fails to trickle down, and the language of the decision is inaccessible, and the agency to get it implemented is not built. So how to kind of start training, simplifying the language of law, reaching out to the communities to explain what their entitlements are, and then if they choose after using grievance redressal mechanisms to approach court in a strategic manner, then to file petitions on specific issues. Nazdeek is a legal empowerment organization which works in South Asia. We started working in Assam with tea plantation workers who were brought in during the colonial period from the central India as slaves about 120 years ago. Their conditions, living and working conditions even today, are very dismal. The tea plantations have highest maternal mortality, high infant mortality, high rate of anemia, and about 1.5 million workers not even paid minimum wage. After that, we moved, or simultaneously, we started working in Delhi in slums. Currently, we work about in 7 to 8 slums in Delhi, wherein we work on legal empowerment, specifically with women. We also started kind of mapping and understanding issues in tea plantations in the South Asia region, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and found that the issues were more or less similar, and forced labor was how it started. Like, for example, in Sri Lanka, Tamils, the workers are Tamils who were brought in from Tamil Nadu. In Bangladesh, the workers are from Jharkhand, who were again brought in during the colonial era at the same time when the workers were forcibly made to move to Assam. So yeah, that's a nutshell of my work. Yeah.
Thank you, Jayashree. So I think one of the things that kept coming up was, the issue of migration and people sort of from one part of the world working in another part of the world. And this is something which obviously the whole lockdown brought out very visibly as to the extent to which we have that in this country and the extent to which workers are unsupported. And I think that's a good cue for Raghav, who works with, who's a researcher at Ajivika, which is a fairly remarkable organization in terms of both the work that they do with practice and research. So Raghav is a researcher, and Raghav, maybe you could share both a little bit about Ajivika, your own journey. Why are you doing what you are? I think it's good to always have that also there. Thanks.
Sure. Sure. Thank you, Professor Sureen. Thank you for moderating this panel. Yeah, so I studied history at college, and I kind of focused on the history of migration in South Asia, which is actually how I ended up at Ajivika. It's I suppose one of the few organizations catered specifically to seasonal migrants, and so we're an organization that we're based in West India, in Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Maharashtra. And we've been working with seasonal migrants for over 15, 16 years now. And we have a presence both at the source of migration. So that's southern Rajasthan, which is an Adivasi belt, as well as the destination of migration in large urban areas like Ahmedabad, Surat, as well as an office in Bombay. And I think that the main goal is to kind of treat migration as an inevitability, but to ensure that it is safe and dignified when it does happen. And so for that, we work with a lot of workers, collectives, and unions, both at the source and the destination, to talk about rights and entitlements and citizenship. We provide services. So we have a health team that is currently working very hard in southern Rajasthan, a team of paralegals conducting legal aid that is also kind of compatible with the informality that so many migrants kind of work in, right? So these are migrants at the lowest levels of the value chain, on construction sites, in small manufacturing and recycling units, in small dhabas on the sides of highways, domestic workers, etc. So I think what our legal aid tries to do is to work with this informality, right? Work with the fact that there are no employer-employee relationships, and how do you work around that hurdle to ensure justice and citizenship rights for everyone. Yeah, so so that's kind of the nutshell about Ajivika. And as you can imagine, at this point, at a time when labor laws, there's a kind of assault being launched on labor laws and fundamental rights for migrant workers. Kind of all our units are being worked right now across the 3 states.
Great. Thanks, Raghav. Aniket, I think Aniket, we've actually met at some point because of the work that we were doing with Right to Education. Yeah. And Aniket's of course working across many different sort of arenas and sectors. So if Aniket, quickly, if you could share sort of what makes you active at this point, and why what Haq Darshak has been doing.
Yeah, thank you, Angu. So I actually started off, like you said, in education. Back then we were working on RT section 12(1)(c). Before that, I was teaching in municipal schools in Pune through Teach for India in 2010-12. I think across the work in communities, one common gap that one saw was that there is not enough information on government schemes. There are so many government schemes, and we are seeing that even more so even now with the current situation. And the idea was that how do you get people bridge this gap in the information rights. So we essentially at Haq Darshak have a technology platform which profiles the citizens, screens the citizens, and tells them what are the eligible schemes. And we have a research team which digitizes all those schemes. We've digitized close to 7,000 schemes right now. One of the focus areas is to focus on local languages, because the content has to be completely in local languages. The second key focus area has been to train local community women. So we do all our work, and 80% of our work is actually in rural areas and 20% in urban areas. All our work is done via training local women who work as entrepreneurs, who then use the platform and help people first establish what are they eligible for in terms of schemes and documents. And as most of the panelists in their work would have seen, and for example, must have worked on, is the documentation is the biggest challenge, right? Like a scheme application in itself is not the big problem. The problem is the different documentation required, the different rules required around schemes. Schemes eligibility criteria work like a probability theorem. It is like if and or conditions. If you belong to this caste and of this income or of this domicile, or if you are disabled, you'll get this particular scheme. So essentially the work has been around focusing on training the local women or local community partners who can then take it forward. And now, right now, our work is spread across 20 states. And with the current COVID situation, a lot of our work has actually now, immediately after the lockdown, we started our focus in urban areas, because that was these were the areas where there was the most need, especially on ration, getting people e-passes, and facilitating transport. And now I think the focus again has to go back to rural areas where the reverse migration is happening. And how can we establish getting them NREGA, getting them other schemes which can get quick employment to the workers. So that's been the focus area right now.
Great. Thanks, Aniket. So, all of you, I mean, the work that you're doing is never easy to do, especially when you're trying to, the power equations are so skewed, and you're sort of in some ways making demands and placing demands on the government to fulfill obligations that the government has made itself. But I imagine these are even tougher times than usual, and that not that they've been easy even immediately prior to the whole COVID crisis that we face today, but I'm guessing things have changed in your organizations. Maybe a couple of minutes each, if you could share. And Aniket, you've already done that a little bit in sharing how you have sort of shifted or pivoted to something that needs priority right now. Maybe if Abhay, if you could share, how things are changing for you, how you see yourself responding, what do you think you could be doing, at these times, and where might also you benefit from additional resources, whether it be volunteers or other people who might come in, or just financial support. So if all of you could just, a couple of minutes on these issues, if we could go around the room, that would be great. Could we start with Abhay, please?
All right. So I'm based in Shivpuri, and my colleague is based in Gwalior. For Shivpuri and Gwalior, we have 84% of the population as who is rural. The percentage of population is 84, around 84. Now, as soon as this lockdown was announced, most of the workers from villages go to other places, because these are belts where there are not many employment opportunities. So we have like a lot of migrant labor who go, and most of them also happen to be tribal, the areas who we work closely with. So previously we used to, because we focus on law and policy, so we used to have a strategy and approach towards addressing any issue. If it comes to us, we had a legal strategy as to, now this is how we are going to start. Now we are going to write representation, or we are going to court, or we are going to approach authorities. But as soon as this lockdown was announced, sorry for that. As soon as the lockdown was announced, what happened?
There was. Yes. So as soon as this lockdown was announced, what happened was there was immediate panic in the villages and in the city as to what is going to happen and how is it going to happen. We were getting calls related to ration. We were getting calls related to pension, that they have money in their account. This was the first time that they had money in their account, but they're not able to get it. So, you know, what use is if even if you have 500 rupees in your Jan Dhan account, there is like a queue of 500 in the bank. So the kind of issues that started coming to us change entirely from the long-term legal entitlements to short-term legal entitlements like ration, pension, getting back to the village somehow. So this is so, and we had to, you know, come up with different kind of strategies to address each of these issues, and also understanding how, because the social distancing and the lockdown had its own principles, how we can use technology effectively to make sure that the issues upcoming are addressed. So for example, one of the things that we did, and which could be maybe serve as an example, is that we started a coordination group for an entire city, because the ration is there, the civil society is also distributing ration, but what we need is effective management of resources so that they are channelized in a proper manner. So we created this entire group where, you know, anybody, for coordinating the needs, basically assessing that ration is required here, coordinating with the administration. If they are not able to reach, then contacting the civil society. So starting coming up with this kind of system, so that we have an online data flowing as to this is required at this place, this is required, ration is required this place, medical assistant required at this place. And then, you know, coordinating with, because we could not approach the court to do all of this work, because a lot of time would have been wasted and we weren't even sure of the results. As for the migrant laborers, this is what we are still doing. First thing that we are doing is we are coordinating with the state government, and they're sending us the list of all the trains that are running for Maharashtra. So we are just taking care of state of Maharashtra. All the migrant labor who are supposed to come from Maharashtra to Madhya Pradesh, we get the list of passengers. What we do is we call each one of them, inform them their serial number, and through negotiation or through different skills, we make sure that they get bus, taxi, or some means through the police or through the administration in Maharashtra to reach the station and board the train. Secondly, the workers who are still left, right now what we are doing is we are coordinating with the state government and their officials to make sure that, you know, some kind of arrangement is made. So here is where we are realizing that we need maybe less legal skill and more negotiation and convincing skills to, you know, make sure that these migrant laborers are sent back to their homes.
Raghav, do you want to pick up on that? Because
Sure.
you know, the discussion on migrant workers, and also maybe, you know, let's also look a little ahead. I mean, so I know all of us are in some ways fighting an immediate crisis, but where do you think we could be also moving forward? You know, how do we change things? What do we do differently?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm going to focus just on three things that we're doing, because I mean, being an organization that has been working with migrant workers for a long time, I mean, all of our units are kind of working like they would, and I mean, I suppose to heighten capacities and durations. But just three things. One is that you know, we're seeing a lot of stigma against migrant workers returning to their villages. You know, seeing there have been terms in Ahmedabad, for instance, terming them super spreaders, and we're kind of, you know, battling every day against the stigma that they're facing. So we have several collectives of Adivasi women in southern Rajasthan who are working to spread, you know, information, accurate information about COVID, about the way it's transmitted, and this is, you know, achieved both a decentralization, because these are panchayat level collectives, as well as scale, because you know, we work in a large number of panchayats. So that's one thing that we're doing at the source end, just to battle this information, the misinformation and the stigma against migrants. The second thing is our labor helpline, which is run with the Rajasthan government, has been receiving, you know, hundreds of calls every day. in the initial phases, it was largely to do with rations. But as time went on, we realized that a larger number of workers, had outstanding wages that were not paid, as a result of which they couldn't, procure train tickets, access to health, or even food. So our legal team, our paralegals at the source, as well as us, who've kind of doubled up as legal counselors over the phone. We're kind of doing that. We are using mediation techniques like we always have, because again, we're working with an incredibly informal segment of the population where mediation is perhaps the most effective way to access justice. Mediation calls are underway in Bombay, Ahmedabad, Surat, as well as at the source in southern Rajasthan. And lastly, I think, and this kind of points to your second question about where we can go. We've been also trying to, argue that this crisis is not something that happens suddenly. Its roots are incredibly deep. They begin, as early as 1990 with the liberalization and the neoliberal model of governance and growth that India is seeing. As well as the idea of citizenship that of late, of course, has been very contested. Since this is a panel of rights and entitlements, I just want to point out that the reason that migrant workers in cities are unable to access any rights and entitlements to a large extent, of course, a lot of them are, is because the way that we define urban citizenship is by tying it inextricably to domicility, right? So you can access the PDS in a city if you have a ration card with an address of the city on it, right? You can access the National Urban Livelihoods Mission if you can prove that you're a resident of the city. The PM Awas Yojana is the same thing. Even for something like a driver's license, you require to provide, an electricity bill or a rent agreement that shows that you're a domicile of that city. And that's why, and this is a narrative and a model that has been happening for a long time. And that is why the people that get left out of a system that demands permanent presence in a city are seasonal migrants, right? Who move back and forth between their village and the city for 3 to 11 months if they are never able to achieve a foothold there, right? And so going forward, I think that, our efforts to accommodate this mobility and multi-locality need to be really looked at, right? Both civil society and the government need to work towards efforts that recognize this mobility rather than criminalizing it, right? Rather than calling them outsiders or even guest workers at best. You need to recognize them as legitimate urban citizens who have rights, not least because they subsidize the growth of our largest urban centers, right? And one way to do that really quick is to ensure universal access for citizens, right? The PDS portability that was announced by the government will leave out, millions of migrant workers who leave their families behind in the village and move to the cities. So who's the one that's going to be carrying the ration card, right? That's a huge question the government needs to answer. And so one kind of answer to that, I'm just looking at the clock and I'm going to go really quick, is universal access for all, right? Particularly the citizens who subsidize the growth of our urban centers. Because the more categories and the more bureaucratic rules that we create, the more people that we actually exclude from welfare that should be universal.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Aniket, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think I would like to kind of look at one part of the looking ahead would be a discussion that we've been having in the team and with some external stakeholders is a possibility of some kind of a national urban guarantee program, which has for which we have to very strongly figure out the urban identity part, which Raghav mentioned, because urban migrants, the biggest challenge is how do you identify urban migrants and the money that is being budgeted for them. If you look at like a simple document and scheme like BOCW, right? So 35,000 crores is what the finance minister of this country said is available. Some estimates say it should have been at least 52,000 crores. That's basically the 2% cess that any construction company has to keep aside for worker welfare. A, the workers don't know about it. B, it shows that there is money available, but because of how you are identifying a worker, where they are, what is the documentation required for it, workers lose out because workers are not going to be at a construction site for 12 months. So they're going to avail 6 months of Narega wages. They're going to avail 6 months of ration in the home village. They're going to avail 6 months of caste certificate benefits. And for 3 or 4 months, they're going to come here in a Gurgaon or in a Bombay or in a Pune and also work on construction sites. So how do you ensure that at both places, as long as a worker in this country is working, any working person should deserve the equal rights? So just like a lot of us are also urban migrants, it's just that we are privileged migrants. A lot of us come from small towns, small villages, go to big cities, get educated. So I think that is definitely there. But I would like to add one important point here is of the political economy. That while it is great to look at things of universalization, and I think that's pragmatically a great approach, but I do feel that, it's going to be a huge challenge with how states and center, the federal economy works. There is a huge issue of center taking away a lot of federal rights already. Making more things centralized will take away the little rights that states have left. So how do you address that? Secondly, if there is someone in Delhi, working in Delhi, but they belong to UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, for example, they're going to go and vote there. So what is the incentive for the local corporator or MLA to ensure that this person gets the schemes? Usually at a village level, you have the Gram Panchayat or Gram Sevak as the go-to person for any kind of grievance or any kind of, if you're not getting an Narega wages, if you're not getting your basic pension. In the city, when a migrant comes, they do not have that kind of support, local support, but because the local leadership is focused on the political side of things. So how do you also address that? So I think those are questions which this pandemic has given us an opportunity to look at. But I would think without solving that, it will be a huge challenge, because we've already seen in a lot of schemes in the past, like Ayushman Bharat, still not implemented in West Bengal, started getting implemented in Punjab in February. Madhya Pradesh, in the last year and a half, Awas Yojana wasn't being implemented. Before that, till BJP was there, it was one of the highest states getting the grant for Awas Yojana. So some of these schemes, while they are central government schemes, should be given to everyone, like Ujjwala, like the schemes on Swachh Bharat, but they have a lot of political connotation. One way to look at it is, can we be pragmatic as a society, as politicians, and remove the PM, CM tags? Just a housing program, just a sanitation program with a list of choices, right? I am from Himachal Pradesh. I should have a choice from getting an Ayushman to a Himcare, depending on my eligibility, just like I'm filling a premium. So I, as a citizen of a particular state, I should be able to get any healthcare scheme in an urban city. So one of the things is, because it has the tags of a prime minister, of a chief minister, of an ex-prime minister, of an ex-chief minister, it is very difficult politically, I feel, for states to implement it if you don't get along with the center. And it's across political parties. I mean, not saying it happens now and things used to work very smoothly in the past or vice versa.
True, Aniket. I mean, I think the issue of sort of the political economy is critical. I mean, talking about workers, etc., and a lot of the workers are in construction, and every person who's doing any construction needs to get permission. So a very simple resolution to many of these issues could be that before you give permission to construct, you actually, they have to register how many workers are there, where are they from, how many children are there. And only then, when you have that information and you know whether they're getting their entitlements, you go ahead, you give permission for construction. And now, of course, there are people that won't be up in alarms. We don't want rules, we don't want laws. But if you really care about the people actually building the buildings, that's where we need to begin in some ways. So, but, your points are very well taken. Jayashree, if I could quickly move to you, and let me also just, there are a number of participants that we do have who sort of are patiently listening. Please, this is the time, we hope your questions start coming in. Jayashree, cutting across sectors, and sections of society, I mean, there's an increasing issue of denial of services also that we are witnessing today. And so if you could also, touch on that while touching on, how you are looking sort of forward in terms of your programming and planning.
Yeah. I'm very thankful for my fellow panelists, because they have made my job very easy. I completely agree with Ankit when he says that there are several government schemes and people are just not aware of them. And it is so important to raise that awareness in a language which is accessible to the beneficiaries. Again, I agree with Abhay when he says that as soon as the pandemic, this entire Pandora's box opened, even being as a lawyers, for us going to court did not seem as an immediate step to take, and relief work and life-saving relief work was the first step which we chose to take, as court became inaccessible and their reaction was is very unpredictable. And then when Supreme Court came in and said that we are not going to question the government, that became very clear that what we anticipated as a reply of the court. And when Raghav says that a lot of benefits are tied up to the concept of citizenship, you need several documents like ration card, Aadhaar card, or anything. So this is very, very important background. Like we started looking closely at these slum dwellers in Delhi, also rehabilitation colony developers, dwellers. As soon as the lockdown was announced, there was a panic, sense of panic.
Sorry, we couldn't catch the last 10 seconds.
As soon as the lockdown was announced, there was a sense of panic within people, because these are people who are daily wages and didn't have the stores of grains or any life-saving like medication at their house, and the access to any of the services was completely stopped, as in outside many of these bastis there was a heavy patrol of police. Then there was a big number of homeless population, which comprises of adult and children, and because of the lockdown, that homeless population immediately became visible, exposing a lot of children to sexual abuse. The lot of population, lot of people who live on streets are also migrant workers, who could either be engaging in construction work, hotel industry, or any small scale industry. The issues which came out was access to food, access to water, access to sanitation, access to shelter, and healthcare. And it was in that order. So Corona wasn't the first, or COVID-19 wasn't the immediate concern of migrants or slum dwellers. The immediate concern was hunger, food, starvation. And access to health facilities. Specifically looking at women, we have seen several cases coming in from Delhi and various other states in India, where women have been denied access to life-saving services during the childbirth. There are several cases where women have delivered right outside the hospital. There was one case from Nizamuddin who a woman whose pregnancy is critical and was not able to access a hospital because the area was closed. There's another case where a migrant worker who was walking from Delhi towards her home delivered on her way, got half an hour to rest, and then started walking again. So these are the kind of issues we came across within Delhi. Within Assam, the issues were that for the first couple of weeks, when the entire industry was shut down, no back wages are paid to the workers. When there's a reverse migration, people coming from different parts of India back to the plantations, there was no facility to test or quarantine, because especially the population living within the plantation is already vulnerable for any infection to spread. In this backdrop, and I think all other three panelists have given a good background as well, I think what we saw our role was to immediate provide relief, and while providing relief, monitor what are the new schemes which have been launched specifically during the time of COVID-19, to analyze them, simplify them, disseminate them. And then we started monitoring the implementation of these schemes. For example, if the ration is being delivered at the ration shop, and is ration owner giving out ration with the enhanced entitlement. if our Anganwadi is running, are women getting proper healthcare services? So we started filing complaints on online portal. We started sending written complaints to different relevant agencies. We also filed a petition before Delhi High Court, where in one of the communities, Bakrola, where 800 families are being relocated by the government, did not have food, and was at the brink of starvation. And we were sent to the registrar, and the registrar said, well, court, we don't think it's an important matter. You go and write to the government. We weren't even given a chance to address to the court. um, we have again filed a petition before the Supreme Court, or an application before the Supreme Court, through one of the unionists for the back wages of the workers. A notice has been issued in that matter. But all the grievances which we have filed, we have continuously monitoring for the reply, and in none of those grievances we have received any reply. Now, just quickly as to what we could do better is, the only 1.28% of our GDP is spent on health. We need to increase that. We need to stop we need to stop our healthcare system to be privatized. I completely agree with Raghav when he says that there needs to be universal access to food, there needs to be universal access to health. Our social security system needs to be better. We over like last 3-4 years kept on filing applications for pension, with again no response. But as soon as the COVID-19 hit India, the government says that okay, we will send double the pension. But then many of people who have applied for pension have not heard back, so they are falling through the cracks. So how to strengthen the social security system, how to strengthen our government education system, and how to be better prepared for pandemics like this, because this is not the first time. Like there were cases of previous viruses within India, and there has been casualties. I'm blanking out on a couple of names, but there has been casualties. So this is something not new, and it seems from all the experts who we've been watching over last couple of months, and over last year, and they say that these are going to be recurring issues. And so it is really important to invest in our health system. It is really important to invest in universal food and social security.
Thank you for that, Jayashree. I think we've lost Professor Ankur temporarily, so I'm just going to quickly step in. And just looking at the clock, we have about 10 minutes left, and we started getting a couple of questions from the audience. I'm just going to take a couple of questions. Some of them I'm going to leave open to you to decide who can take. We've got one question. What role can data play in ensuring that every rupee counts? And are organizations able to track the data from the government, and how this money is being utilized? Raghav, do you want to try taking this question, and then we'll try moving into Aniket and Abhay. Raghav?
Yeah, sure. So there have been several efforts by the government to kind of enumerate data on a national level, right? You have the State Migrant Workers Act. That was one where the worker was kind of supposed to register at the source and the destination with the contractor that was kind of taking them to the city. But as you can imagine, the informality involved and the way that workers are actually recruited makes that act completely defunct. I will say though that, following up on my comment about, workers being left out of NULM, PDS and other urban schemes, I think that one steps that urban local bodies can actually take is to begin an enumeration of migrant settlements, right? A lot of incentives and a lot of schemes, like I mentioned, are based on domicility, right? So you have to prove that you're from a given city to access them. And incentives for health workers, for instance, are designed around how many follow-up visits they take to a particular basti. And with migrants obviously coming and going, health workers are not incentivized to actually visit them. So basically, urban local bodies need to start enumerating migrant settlements, recognizing them as legitimate parts of the city, and using the data that they get on the number of migrants, the nature of migrants, the seasonality of migrants, to make particular allocations to the public distribution system and the other schemes that I mentioned. And that's, the government's announcement of portability will be a test of that, right? How are they going to manage the dynamic demand in cities as migrants circulate in and out of them? So that's one place at a very kind of localized urban level that the government and civil society, of course, can start. And the data that they've collected from the migrant crisis right now can serve as a starting point for that.
Got it. Aniket, are you seeing anything different on the ground? Is the data that the government is collecting, are they being open about sharing this data with organizations like yours? What is it that you're seeing?
So firstly, I think government also doesn't have the right data. I mean, for urban migrants, especially, government has no clue because they have data around their domicile. See, when you are designing policies and schemes around domicile, it's only an estimate that so many workers are there and so many workers would. It's all essentially on estimate. So a lot of ground data that they get now is around ESIC, PF, how many workers are working. So that's a small percentage, as we know. Or how many workers get registered under BOCW, how many workers are working in factories. So it leaves out a lot of street vendors. It leaves out a lot of people in the informal economy. It leaves out a lot of NACA workers who are not nowhere. So one is that government also has formally a lot of or very limited data. So when you talk to government officers, they will talk about very similar numbers that the civil society talks to you informally. Formally, it's a very small number compared to what should be. So you will talk about only 80 million workers in India, where everyone right from government and civil society will say that there are close to 200 million workers. So that difference is there in the policy design itself. So I think it's that becomes a big challenge for any person in the system to get the right data. But it's very difficult to get data from the government. When you file RTIs, when you file a lot of scheme applications, and I'm not only talking about urban here, I'm talking about rural as well. So a lot of RTIs that we file in our work for Gram Panchayats and other work, we do a project in Talasari, which is a tribal belt in Maharashtra. And we've been working with 30 Gram Panchayats there. So the kind of applications filed, you get data for a year and a half back at best. So I think there is a huge gap in for government itself to have real-time monitoring data. Wherever certain government departments do have good data, it's in silos. So it's not in one place. You'll have the same set of data spread across 34 state departments or sometimes central government departments. So I feel a lot of the first step has to be recognizing that we are not getting quality good data. And if we are getting quality good data across civil society and government, we're not utilizing it enough. And there I would also like to point out, it's just not government. It's also all the civil society, technology, NGO, all the organizations. Every organization collects data. Whether it's offline or online by default or by intention, every single organization collects data. Some of them acknowledge it. Some of them sometimes don't even know it. But nobody's actually bringing that together for a particular geography and trying to think of solutions. So that is a gap even in the sector. So it's just not government. Even the sector which is working on this is not coming together with this data and putting it on open source or sharing it for solutions. So for the current schemes also going forward, I think that's a big issue.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And on that note, the PM Cares Fund has become a very hot political topic. I'm going to leave this open. I know it's a hot topic for anyone to touch, but do we know, is there some way we can track the PM Cares Fund? Is it subject to the RTI? I'm going to leave this open. If one of you wants to fall for it, please.
So, I mean, I can go first. The PM Cares Fund is an absolutely opaque fund. So, I mean, there were a lot of messages actually from my own team saying that, it's such a great thing that the PM Care Fund has allocated 3,100 crores recently, right, for ventilators and all. The problem with it is that we don't know what percentage of the fund it is. It's great if it is 90% of the fund, but what if it's just 1% of the fund? So I think yeah, I mean, it's a very simple, at least from our end, like there is no, if it is not going to be audited by CAG, then it is very difficult to know what percentage of funding is going to be. And it's actually very, very closely linked to the kind of work all of us are doing, because all the CSR money is mandatory going to this PM Care Fund. If you look at the recent reports, 80% of the current, this first quarter relief funds have gone to PM Care Fund. So unless and until there is transparency around what is the total fund in the first place, where it is being allocated is just a number. But if we don't know what's the fund in the first place, it not only is a problem in the PM Care Fund, but we have to look at the larger picture, is going to undermine a lot of civil society programs that are happening on ground. And there is acknowledgement from Niti Aayog itself. The CSOs have worked in certain states giving more ration than the government. It's acknowledged fact by Niti Aayog. So if you're acknowledging that, this PM Care contribution is actually going to impact a lot of organizations. And not only for COVID and healthcare and relief, some of the organizations, for example, working in education, in livelihoods, in the long run, are going to get impacted now in the next couple of years. So, I mean, there needs to be transparency, but at least for now, it doesn't seem like we have any visibility into the total allocation.
Jayashree, I want to quickly come to you. Do you see an opportunity here to maybe tap into the PM Care Fund for the kind of programs that you're running? Is there any way that organizations can actually tap into this fund? Any insight into how the government plans to use this fund? Is this even a fund that comes under the government, or is it a private fund?
I have actually not looked into it, but I agree with Ankit. It needs to be audited, and if it's not audited, then I think not using the fund directly through our work would kind of give us a little more liberty to question it. So maybe that's the strategy, and I think one of our strategy is to demand for an audit. And once it becomes transparent, then one could understand whether there are any opportunities within it to use this fund.
Thank you for that, Jayashree. I think we have time to just take one more question. There are a lot of organizations who are sort of overlapping in some of their interventions, right? We've seen a sudden uptake in Telegram groups and WhatsApp groups that encompass several organizations trying to coordinate between themselves, both resources and in terms of which communities they reach out to. How effective is this collaboration between organizations? And if you can maybe share some examples, Abhay, if we can start with you. If you can share some examples of how organizations are collaborating to ensure that there's no overlap in terms of the efforts that they're putting on ground.
Yes, so basically, since we have very less time left, it's very important at this moment for the civil society to work in collaboration, setting aside the kind of differences that exist today or the NGOization that exists today. But this collaboration is that the resources are channelized in the proper place, that there is no, there are no two people wasting their energy and efforts at the same place. Second, at the same time, what we really need to do is we need to introduce, and it applies to me as well personally, but we need to really adapt to the technology and have more and more technological innovations in the social sector, which is not happening really if you see the local realities. And finally, if I have 15 more seconds, which I'll mindfully take, regarding the PM cares, what we actually need is the district level and the tehsil level care fund, not the PM care fund. And that's how that's what decentralized government is, and that's where the local administration, the tehsil and the district administration can ensure that resources are given to the people, and they know it better than the state government or the central government.
I would also like to add here, in our experience, what happens is, because we have to remember that we are under a lockdown. So we wanted to reach as many people with ration, dry ration or cooked food, but because of issue of mobility, the partnering with other organizations became all the more important. For example, to give you an example of Tamil Nadu, in Tamil Nadu, there are the textile and garment factory workers, and there are several migrant workers and local workers who were struggling with food. So what we did is we identified a local organization who has connections within that community, understood how many people they can reach out to. Once that contact was established, the local organization sent us a budget saying that according to our estimate, there are 200 families. In the average size of family is 5 people, and what their need is rice, dal. In some cases, we were asked to give potatoes, soya nuggets, haldi, soap. In Assam, we were asked for mustard oil, so a kind of a customized kit for every region. Once that customized kit and a budget is prepared, then along with that organization, we would do a fundraising. Once the fundraising is done, if an individual wants to donate for that specific community, then we would connect the individual with that organization and facilitate the transfer of money. Once the transfer of money is done either to a vendor directly or to the organization who then goes and buy the food and distributes it, the bill and few pictures where people's faces are not visible are sent to us, and then we send them those to the person who pledged to donate. And that has been the pattern in Delhi. I live around in Jangpura, and in Delhi, as Abhay and all have created a group, we also had created a group in Delhi. And if there is an SOS call comes, which is around where I live, then I would go downstairs. So 1 or 2 members of the people who would want food would come down. I'll buy that food, give them, take a picture of a bill, take a couple of pictures of food grain being given, and then upload it on that WhatsApp group, where someone would then make an Excel sheet of how many families we were able to reach, to which family who donated, and a picture against it. Same thing we did it in Assam, because we wanted to reach as many people, as many families, without putting anybody in jeopardy. So identifying who is the closest person to the family in need was important, and for that web network of organizations and similar like-minded individuals came in very handy.
Right. And I think that's a great example of collaboration. This reminds me, in one of the previous organizations that I worked, we had a huge plaque on the wall that said "Collaborate or Die." And I think it also, and I think also what's important, that we need to think about how we collaborate with the government. Very often the government is blind on the ground, and they rely very heavily on civil society and organizations like yours to gain visibility into areas that they don't. I really wish we could have explored that idea a little more. We've unfortunately gone over time. On that note, I'd like to thank all of you for being here for this session. Thank you to our panelists. Unfortunately, we lost Professor Ankur somewhere in the middle. Thank you to him as well. Very quickly, just a few parting messages before we end this. This session, again, is dedicated to Professor Shyamnath Bashir.